And this month, we're joined by Carolyn Walskog and Genna Scott. We're going to be talking about the issues and concerns and resources for transgender youth. Carolyn works for 360 Youth Services and Youth Outlook, and Genna is involved with Youth Outlook. So I really appreciate both of them being here, and I'm going to let them kind of tell us what they do with those organizations. So welcome both of you again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So Carolyn, tell us what you do at 360 Youth Outlook and 360 Youth Services and Youth Outlook.
Yes. Hi. Thanks again. Carolyn, I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the Senior Program Manager at 360 Youth Services. We have a transitional housing program for youth experiencing homelessness, and I manage the LGBT housing program.
Awesome.
And at Youth Outlook, I'm the Community Education and Gender Programming Manager, which means that I work with schools, hospitals, behavioral health folks, anyone who's interested in working with LGBT young people and how to make their spaces more safe. And then I also run our Transcend program, which is how I know Genna, and which is a free drop-in center for trans and non-binary youth that meets in Naperville.
Okay, awesome. And Genna, you're involved with Youth Outlook?
Yes, I'm Genevieve, or Genna, or Frenchie for short, nickname.
Mm-hmm.
I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. I'm a youth leader at Transcend.
Mm-hmm.
I've been going for about 2 years now. I'm essentially responsible for helping organize workshops and things like that.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys for being here. So tell us a little bit more about Youth Outlook and the different things that happen at Youth Outlook.
Yeah, so Youth Outlook is was essentially created to be a space for young people to connect. So back in 1998, we were founded because we needed a place for LGBT youth, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender youth, to be safe and not have to go into the city. So right now we have 7 different drop-in centers from Naperville all the way out to Sterling and Ottawa.
Wow.
And up in Palatine. And those drop-in centers are free for youth to come, hang out, get psychoeducational support, meet friends, learn about the community, and just have a safe space. And so with everything that's happened in our world, with all that changing, we've expanded beyond just doing drop-in centers, but also providing that community education piece so that all the other spaces that our young people inhabit are welcoming and affirming.
So what are some of those other programming things beyond the drop-in centers?
Yeah, so we have a community network group that we operate in different, in Kane County, DuPage County, North Suburban, Cook area. That is an opportunity for professionals to come together monthly and attend trainings and really think about how to change their spaces. We have worked with Linden Oaks Behavioral Health to update their policies for inpatient and looking at other opportunities for outpatient, safe space sticker campaigns, getting our young people involved in panels, and finding ways to help humanize this issue that sometimes just becomes something that's on our news feeds, but really what does it mean for us to see ourselves in our community?
Okay. So like in terms of some of the safe space things that you've done, what does that entail?
So can you tell me more about what you're
Well, I guess
wondering?
you mentioned like that you work with organizations to help create kind of safe spaces, or was that the terminology that you used?
I mean, generally with anybody who's interested in an entry point into thinking about making spaces more affirming, we always start with terminology. So especially with schools, a lot of times, I don't know if you've had this experience, Jenna, that teachers are afraid to say the wrong thing, so they say nothing at all, and you find yourself erased. So I think that we start with helping people understand terminology, thinking about what it means to enter your space. So what does your website look like? How does someone greet you on the phone? What do the forums look like, right? Is my family or my identity reflected? So what are the cues that you're giving me that this is a place where I can be? And then I think people get really worked up thinking like, I don't know how to work with trans people. This is something new, but really stepping back and thinking about the skills that we already have to support people, and really asking people for what they need and asking terms that they use to define themselves, their bodies, and putting that power back on folks so that they can access services in an affirming way.
I do think that sometimes that there is a big fear on the part of people to say, oh my gosh, I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So I can see how then people don't say anything at all and maybe, yeah, like you end up feeling ignored. How have you noticed changes, Genna, over the years in terms of how people talk to you, respond to you, or just the whole trans issue in general?
So I'm, for the most part, cis-passing. So it's very different, reflecting on how I used to be treated, I guess you could say. I was still, for a long time, I was figuring out, you know, how I wanted to present. And just until this year, I consider myself binary, and now I consider myself non-binary. So I think, you know, like in classes, before I had my name legally changed, people wouldn't say anything when I asked them to use my correct name. Because when they go around in the attendance in classrooms, you know, your dead name is unfortunately said a lot of the time. And I would correct them and ask them to use my preferred name. And, you know, I never got much said about that.
Would people respect that, or would they still kind of insist on calling you by a previous name? Or what terminology did you just use for your previous name?
Dead name.
Okay.
Or birth name.
Okay. Did people respect your request for a different name?
Kind of. Some teachers would, and others would forget my preferred name. I don't know how they manage that, because it's usually written down as this is what the student prefers. So.
And it's really not that different than a student saying, hey, I get that's my first name on the piece of paper, but I always go by my middle name or something. But for some reason, that seems to be a big leap, maybe for some people.
So you've seen that people have been better about respecting names and introducing themselves with pronouns more over the years?
Yeah. Actually, this class I'm taking right now, Painting 1, the teacher asked us in this form she gave us to fill out what preferred pronoun we use.
Nice.
But I think she's one of those teachers that excludes they, them pronouns and other pronouns and just focuses on very binary pronouns.
But at least that's kind of a step towards asking that question without making an assumption on somebody's, on the part of somebody.
So I guess we're seeing progress, but a lot of room to still go.
Absolutely.
That makes sense, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Are there other changes that you've seen schools make, for example, or what is the response on the part of schools in general? And I guess I'm thinking more like middle high schools.
Yeah, I think, so Youth Outlook was a part of helping to support one of the first GSAs in the state of Illinois, and that was maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
And GSAs are?
Gay straight alliances or gender and sexuality alliances.
Okay.
And so now we have so many middle school GSAs partnered with high school GSAs, so I think having those groups says a lot. I think each school is handling it really differently. It's a kind of a legal gray area right now, so some schools are saying, we're going to do like the minimum of what we need to do based on the law. And some schools are really being proactive and saying we're going to create a policy, an administrative procedure. We're going to let students know what accommodations they can access and that type of thing. But even with schools that have those procedures, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to shift some of the culture, is what we're hearing. I think you'd agree. Yeah.
Right. Great. So we do need to take a break, but when we come back, I'd like to talk maybe a little bit about what are some of the specific, more specifically, what are some of the challenges that trans youth face. So join us when we come back so we can hear more from Carolyn and Genna. Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. I'm Denise Ellsbury, and we've been talking with Carolyn Walskog and Genna Scott about some of the concerns and issues faced by transgender youth. So I know one of the things that we've noticed just from hearing on the news and things like that, a lot more discussion about younger and younger young people identifying as being trans and kind of making those transitions. And I think people don't understand that. So why is that maybe that seems to be happening younger? And this might be an ignorant question, but is that a good thing? Because I know that's a question that a lot of people ask, right?
Yeah, I think that's a question that we get a lot. Do you mind if I take?
Sure.
Okay. So I think that, well, research shows that we have an idea about our gender identity around age 3. Everybody does, right? Everybody has a gender identity. And around age 6, we've kind of formed our patterns of behavior, our gender expression, our own internal sense of self. And so all people are doing that. And I think now young people have models and representation and terminology to kind of describe their experience. So while as there isn't more trans people than there was before, but there's just been access to role models and other people, so people are able to express their experience and not keep it inside as long. Would you agree with that, or do you have any other thoughts? Yeah. And so I think some research that has shown us from Trans Youth Family Allies, which is a national organization, they found that families that they interviewed, their children who identified as trans girls, so they were assigned male at birth and transitioned to female, showed signs or patterns of behavior at younger ages, right, than trans boys. And I think that's because in our world we notice when people who we perceive to be little boys like girl things, and then we see kind of a spike around puberty for trans masculine people coming out, because if you think about all of the things that happen to your body if you're assigned female at birth. And so trans people have always existed, and they've always been there, and now I think people just have a little bit more of a safety net to be able to share that experience at a younger age. The question of whether that's a good thing, I think that's kind of a difficult question. I think being able to come out younger is great because you're not keeping that inside and you can find community. But I also think you're coming out with a brain that's not as developed, right? So all of the negative feedback that you might have can really do a lot of damage. What do you think?
I think the question of whether or not it's a good thing is kind of irrelevant. I think that it's definitely a positive thing that trans youth are coming out earlier. I know from experience or from my life that, I started developing a gender expression very young. I was very into feminine things. I wore a blonde wig. I dressed up like Marilyn Monroe. It was iconic. So I've always been aware of that, and I didn't come to the realization until I was around 14 or 13 that I was trans.
So just to clarify, so prior to that, you kind of understood it for yourself that, well, I just like these things, and that may be different than other boys my age, but this is just what I like. And it wasn't until about, what'd you say, 13
or
14 that you started to think in terms of trans.
I mean, for most of my life, I didn't know being transgender was a thing. And, I never really identified as a male. That was just kind of how I was perceived and how I was told to be.
And how other people related to you.
Yeah. But, I went through the struggle of questioning my sexuality first and then finding out about trans being a thing. And that's when it clicked for me. So I think, again, that the question of whether or not it's good isn't really a question that needs to be asked. I think that we just need to be aware that trans and gender related things exist very early on, and that's completely normal.
I think thank you for sharing that, Genna. I think, and I take your point about like, why do we have to make it good or bad, but look at each person's experience, because it might be different for each person about what is helpful or healthy for them, right? I think one of the things that, because we've talked about language, that probably is hard for some people to wrap their head around is we want to, that idea of being binary, right? Like it's this or that, even my question about good or bad, right? Like, and it's hard for people to not put something in a box, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's maybe some of the conversation that you guys end up having with people in terms of the education.
Absolutely. It's saying getting comfortable with things being both and at the same time, and being comfortable with gray area. Not everything is going to have like an easy way to categorize, and that's okay, and that's what's like beautiful and unique and wonderful about our community.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, a wonderful thing that's come out for everybody about these discussions, right? Is it's freeing for so many people in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about maybe what some of the challenges, and I guess since we're on a mental health first aid show, what might be some of the mental health challenges that trans youth face?
Absolutely. So as a former youth, now that you're 19, 20?
19.
What are some of the challenges that you think you'd highlight?
I think dysphoria is definitely one of the main ones that affects mental health. And I also think it's very understated that trans femme people like me experience dysphoria too, because most of the spaces that I'm in are very trans masc dominated.
So can you explain that just a little bit in case people don't understand?
So transcend, for example, is it consists of mainly trans masculine people, so trans boys, non-binary masculine people, etc. So being a feminine person in that space, I kind of get put on the back burner most of the time. I think it's really important to highlight that trans feminine people experience dysphoria too. And also, I think it's important to highlight, since we're talking about mental health, that that a lot of times, from my experience, trans masculine people kind of say, they'll say things without thinking about it in terms of gender and, spots that cause dysphoria.
Okay, all right. So there's still some misogyny that happens, right, in terms of that masculine dominance in general in our society. So I'm going to ask you to hold, Carolyn. I know you had something that you wanted to add. We need to take another break, and when we come back, please add what you were going to do. And then I really want to focus on like what are the resources that are available for trans people.
Absolutely.
So join us when we come back.
Their support changed my life.
They were like family.
My voice is now heard.
A home for every animal.
My future is bright because they cared.
This is our home now. Thank you to the 1,200 nonprofits that serve Cass and Clay counties every day.
Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. We've been talking with Carolyn Walskog and Genna Scott. And when we left off, I know, Carolyn, you were about to say something. We'd been kind of talking about what are some of the mental health concerns that trans youth experience. And you wanted to add something there after Genna shared her experience.
Absolutely. Well, Genna, I want to say thanks for sharing your
Absolutely.
experience. And I think you highlighted a lot of things that even within our own community we have to work on, right? And that's very common. I think some other mental health areas that we want to focus on are suicide rates. Obviously, we know that trans youth face suicidal ideation and attempts at the rate 9 times their straight and cisgender peers. So when we think about the ways that our world creates people to have anxiety and depression because we don't see ourselves reflected, right? So that's like the interpersonal stuff, and it becomes systems involved, right? So if someone is experiencing or had attempted suicide, then getting involved in the mental, going to the hospital or something like that, and then being greeted at the system that's transphobic or doesn't represent your identity or recognize that, right? Getting systems involved with if you get kicked out of your house and go to a shelter and then they don't allow you to be housed with your affirmed identity, right? All of these systems were created as if transgender people didn't exist, so they can be traumatizing after you've already experienced trauma. The reason that we have an LGBT-specific housing program is because 40% of young people experiencing housing instability identify as LGBT or Q.
Wow.
So I think it's like interpersonal, it's happening at a systems level, and so we have to kind of think about it strategically from all of those levels. So creating conversations so that we can change hearts and minds of families and communities, and also looking at the systems of what else we can do to kind of mitigate some of these challenges.
So just continuing to have conversations and helping people kind of take a step back and think for a minute, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's pretty astounding, some of the stats that you shared in terms of the significantly higher rate of, is it suicide ideation?
And attempts, yeah.
And attempts kind of all together, and the homelessness, right? So it would be kind of a bummer to end with that note, but I know you guys have done a lot of work in terms of resources that are out there. So I definitely want to make sure that we highlight what some of those support services and resources are. So what can you share with us?
For sure, and we want to recognize that, like, Genna and I are associated with organizations that really focus on young people, and our community spans many generations, so this isn't an exhaustive list, but 360 Youth Services, again, we provide housing for LGBT youth as well as counseling from an affirming place. Youth Outlook has drop-in centers across all these different communities that we mentioned. We also have a community network in Kane County and DuPage County that we mentioned earlier that professionals can get involved with.
Okay.
And so anybody is welcome to come and learn, share expertise, and then learn from others. I think some others that we want to highlight are the Transformative Justice Law Project and their name change mobilization, which helps trans people change their names and file for that, and again, navigate systems that were not set up.
So say the name of that organization again.
Transformative Justice Law Project, or TJLP.
Okay.
And so that's something that I'm also involved with in supporting name change work in our area.
So that's a lot of legal stuff that happens in
absolutely.
terms of, like you say, like having your name legally changed.
And guides for how to change your gender marker and all of those different things that when you have to go to each system by yourself, it can be really confusing.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
That could be, yeah, like I can imagine that must be very, very challenging.
Yeah, so I think those are a great organization. Always want to mention PFLAG, which is Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, which is a national organization that has many chapters in our area for parents to find support. Youth Outlook also has a parent group for parents who are actively parenting teens, and most of them are trans. So there's ways for families to get involved. There's other groups that exist like Pinwheels for parents who have kids who are trans who are younger. And then Genna and I also work together at Action Camp through the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance. So I don't know if you want to mention what they do.
I'm not sure how I would summarize Illinois Safe School Alliance because they do so much. They go around to different schools. They're all about creating GSAs and really kind of cultivating those spaces,
Okay.
if that makes sense. But Action Camp is an annual summer camp. I've been going for 4 or 5 years now, and that's where I met Carolyn. But essentially, it's about bringing youth from different regions and giving them skills to take back to their own schools and GSAs to really just help them navigate those spaces.
Okay. So specifically focusing on the school environment and what to do to be safe and advocate as well within the school environment. All right.
And I think just for professionals who want to learn more about specifically mental health, I think looking at Fenway Institute, they have webinars that you can take for healthcare providers and behavioral health providers to learn more about the basics of affirming LGBT clients, as well as WPATH, which is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They have guidelines, standards of care, and so there's a wealth of resources online as well as a lot of different books that we can help direct people to if you want to learn more that way.
But a good starting point is education, right?
Absolutely.
Again, kind of understanding maybe language, which hopefully will then kind of begin to translate into, oh, how does my organization or the system of which I'm a part maybe affirm or create more challenges or problems for trans young people?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So again, the WPATH was?
World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
Okay, because then that is all about sort of like the health world, which you were talking about the legal stuff earlier, but the health piece is yet another environment that could be kind of overwhelming. So
Absolutely.
A lot of different avenues for people.
And I should also mention Lurie Children's Hospital has a gender and sex development program that serves families with children 0 to 24. So we're so lucky to have a resource so close to us to provide health care for our young people. So I think that would be a great place to start as well.
Okay, awesome. You guys, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate our conversation and for you guys taking the time to spend with us. Thank you for joining us for Mental Health First Aid, and until next month, be well. Chit-chat, because it's like they're running the credits.
Okay.
And just look like we're having a little conversation. Thank you. Woo, yeah, you guys are awesome. Really. I really appreciate Carolyn included Genna and like turning to her